Hey, Baba Girls. This is our third week in our Back Secure series, and we'll be looking at our final real woman for our series before we go into the real meat of finance lessons. So I pray that you guys had a very good week. It was great weather here. I hope you got to enjoy some of that where you are. So we will pray to the Father, and then we'll get right into our lesson. So bow your heads with me as we pray. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for this beautiful day that we have experienced to this point. We thank you that you are so mighty and powerful and continue to show us who you are, even in the natural acts of things. We bless you for all that you have done up until this point, and we just thank you that you continue to show us things in your word that can help us along our way. We ask a very special blessing upon all of the Bible girls today as we would go through this crucial and heartfelt lesson on the Shunammite woman. Again, bless and keep each of us is our prayer. These are the blessings we ask in your darling son, Jesus Christ's name. We pray. Amen. All right, ladies. So we're going through finances, and I told you guys what I was going to try to do is take some real women out of the Bible and see how we might get some lessons from their natural stories, even though most cases when we look at them, the things that we get is not finances. But what I'm trying to show you is that all things are not necessarily exactly what is printed or what we have heard, and that we can learn from anything. And so in today's lesson, I know that we've already studied the text before because we actually had it as one of our special carve outs on our first year around. Dr. Joe did her special Bible study night using these stories. In the lesson that she taught us, she talked about how Elijah restored this woman's son that had died. And the words that I remember from her speech, she kept talking about dead, because if you remember, Dr. Joe is a doctor of nursing, and she was giving us a real example of how something that happened in an ER room with her, and somebody was dead but wasn't really dead, and by her hitting them on the chest that they regained their heartbeat or whatever, how she worded it. And she kept saying that all things are not what they appear to be, and that there are some things that can be restored to life. So we've already had this scripture from a text of what the prophet did and about regaining life. So this time we're going to use this scripture to look at some things about finances. I gave you 2 Kings chapter 4, starting at verse 8, for you to that you could well you could have read about 30 verses, and then I'm adding a second part to come full circle on how this story is going to make some sense for our daily lives. Now, in the actual story of the Shunammite woman, um, we should point out that the time period that she lived in was a time period of prophets. It was a time period of a lot of divine interventions. And if, as much as we are stuck in the Old Testament, I'll say it that way, we can clearly pinpoint multiple stories in this time period that's I would label as like the best stories, because they're so full of action, and then you can grab it in another text, which we're gonna be able to do with her as well. If you just follow along in the Bible, right before this would have been where the widow um, lost her husband, and the creditors came because her husband had left some debt, and she didn't have a way to pay. So she went to the prophet and he told her, "What do you have?" She said, "I got some oil." He said, "Okay, get some jars and pour until there is no more." That's the story that comes right before this. And then immediately after that, it starts talking about this Shunammite woman. In Second Kings chapter 4. Her story, um, because there is multiple places that we're going to see her, I'm going to say that her story is very powerful because there's little nuggets that we're going to get that we really don't pull out because we just go so fast about her getting this son and the son coming back to life. So let's actually take a look at what we might be able to see in other contexts of this for how I can relate to finances. Okay, so going too fast. All right, so if we're looking at Second Kings chapter 4, starting at verse 8, is where her actual story begins, and it starts by saying, one day Elijah, who was the prophet, at this time, one day Elijah went to Shunem, and in the NLT version, it actually says that it was a prominent one. Well, this is not NLT. It's a CSB. CSB says she was a prominent woman. If you look at NLT and some others, it say it was a wealthy woman. And I was literally kind of taken back by that because I don't recall any other scriptures actually describing a woman and her wealth. I'm gonna have to check that to see. And if we was doing fun facts, I probably would be looking for that to be the fun fact. But I was kind of pausing for a moment because this is CSB says a prominent woman who lived there persuaded him to eat some food. But again, in other versions, that prominence changed with wealthy or rich or whatnot. So from the description of her, we automatically can put her into our financial series because the word itself described her of being a woman of means. Now, when I was looking at uh verse 8, second part of verse 8, it says, so whenever he passed by, he stopped there to eat. Okay, ESV says great. Says he stopped there to eat. So I kind of think about women, what is it that women have to offer sometimes? And I'm reminded of my grandmother who would always cook. My mom, always cooks as well, but I'm reminding of my grandmother because there was a time that I was visiting, told her that I was going to be visiting and was going to bring some friends with me. And Granny cooked a whole spread of food, and we was only going to be passing through her town, just enough for me to see her that I couldn't come that close to her city and not see her. But Granny cooked so much food, right? And her statement was, I don't have much to give you, but I can feed you. And I know that in the context of most Black families, most Black women, especially those who know how to cook, we know how to stretch some things. Especially if you can cook from scratch, you can take some flour, some milk. Like you can come up with some homemade biscuits in like no time with little to no ingredients. When I was reading this, it said that whenever he passed by, he stopped there to eat. And I just began to say, like, right away in verse 1, we already have an instance of how she was such a real woman that she recognizes that here is in the next verse 2, here is a man of God, and she is offering basic necessities in order for him to be able to continue to do what he has to do. Okay. So then in verse 9, it says, then she said to her husband, I know that the one who often passes by here is the holy man of God. She, so I'm thinking of this like, if in our time now we can read out on the backside that we knew he was a prophet. For her to say that, you would assume that she didn't know that he was a prophet, that it wasn't like widespread that was what he was coming here for. But something about what he did or was doing gave her that I know this is. Why else would she have to say that to her husband? She could have just said, "Hey, the prophet, Elijah." But she didn't. She says, that I know that the one who often passes by here is a holy man of God. So let's make a small walled up room and put a bed, a table, a chair, and a lamp there whenever he comes by here to stay. All right. So what I want to call out or point out to us like right away is that this lady is making an investment and something that she knows. Okay. She not only just went and did something. Hang on, let me mute Miss Yolanda. Okay, I got it. So not only um she did not just go and take out of what she had like Joanna in our first series. She took of her wealth and she supported Jesus. In this case, it says she went to her husband. So if she's wealthy, she has means. She knows that he is a prophet or is a holy man of God. She goes to her husband and says, "We should do this. Okay, this is something we should do." She specifically said, "Let's build him a room. We're gonna furnish it with a bed, a table, a chair, and a lamp." Those are like basic necessities that anybody can have when you are going about your journeys. Like if I go into a hotel right now, those are the basic things that are in there. And I'll be lucky if they always have a separate chair, but they're going to have a table, they're going to have a lamp, they're going to have a bed. So he's passing through. This is not for him to come and live here. He's passing by. So her investment is into the ministry of this holy man that we now know as Elisha. It wasn't that she was trying to like get any credit for anything. And it wasn't that she just, oh, I want him to be here. You could tell that it was something that she perceived something here, but she didn't even know what, if anything, would come of this. She was just being hospitable. And so as a real woman, I'm gonna first say that our basic um responses of things, like what's natural to us. Like, don't go out of your way to do something that's not natural to you, but the natural things, the little things, like what my grandmother say, I know I can feed you. Do what you can and wait. When you put stuff out, you never know what the return is going to be. When we get ready to talk about actually investing in finances, there's some things that we should, I'm gonna say perceive, because that's what I'm gonna say about her. She perceived something about this man. We shouldn't just throw things out to the wolves, but in an essence of moving forward with what she thought or felt, she persuaded her husband to make this investment. And now the man of God has a place to stay and certainly something to eat when he passes through. The littlest things that you could do could make the biggest impacts. Okay. Now, if we read, so that's stopping at verse 10. Okay. Um, I'm going to say here, which I'm alluding to now, is that the things that happened after this all came about because she perceived that he was a holy man and she chose to um, make provisions for him. And not always when you go to make a provision for something is there going to be such a huge return. And we should never do anything in the name of God or the name of ministry expecting a return. But certainly when we actually are walking and aligning ourselves to what he says, we're setting off for God to actually make provisions for us because of our obedience and the way that He is setting things up for us. So don't ignore the options for you to be obedient and for what the return might be for you. Okay. Now, if we actually look um, at the actual stories, um, she built the room or had the room built. That we should look at that as an option of faith. Why would you invite a stranger into your home? That's what we would say nowadays. I don't know that person. Like, I don't know if I would have done that. So I don't want us to be so literal in this case because that would be a smart thing to say. We're not inviting strangers in our house, but doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to follow this to the letter of the text and say build a room for somebody. Okay, so I want to make sure that you don't think that Demetrius saying that we need to be inviting evangelists and people in our home. That is not what I'm saying. I'm saying what she perceived, what she made provisions for, it set her up for the next thing. But we should be having some faith in the actions that we require. Okay. If we read, um, her actual return was a son. So because this story is so good, I want to actually read the actual words. So it's I'm gonna start at verse 11. It says, "One day he came there and he stopped at the upstairs room to lie down." Which is the room that they built for him. Stopped at the room to lie down. He ordered his attendant Gehazi, called this Shunammite woman. So he called her and she stood before him. It says, then he said to Gehazi, say to her, look, you've gone to all this trouble for us. What can we do for you? Can we speak on your behalf to the king or to the commander of the army? Now, right away, her response shows that she didn't do this to get something in return. She generously saw that he was a man of God and just wanted to help and be a part. And is evident by part B of 13. She says, she answered, I am living amongst my own people. In other versions, it says, my family take care of me. And that is one thing that I will always try to caution you guys to say that when you are reading and studying the Bible, look at what the different versions say about things. So one of the versions I read said, my family takes care of me. I don't need anything from you because they take care of me. And she's looking at it from a means of provision, right? He's like, what can I do for you? Verse 14, he says, so he asks, then what should be done for her? Gehazi answered, well, she has no son and her husband is old. So I want to pause right there because we have already studied that the way of life back then was the husband provided for the wife, and it would have been um, seen like a blessing for children to be born to this union. If she had no children and something happened to her husband's brothers were supposed to take her on and provide for her. If she had children, her children are supposed to take care of her. If she had no children and the husband had no brothers, then the church was supposed to provide for her. Okay, so this is very key for Gehazi to say, hey, she ain't got no kids. And in this case, he specifically said no son. She doesn't have a son, and her husband is old. So by that alone, if she is not thinking to say, I can ask for this, this is something I can ask for, you could tell that she was content as well. But he goes, so call her, Elijah said. So Gehazi called her, and she stood in the doorway. Elijah said, at this time next year, you will have a son in your arms. And then she said, no, my Lord, man of God, do not lie to your servant. So it's kind of like, don't be playing with me. Don't say that. Like, because that, again, in that day and time, would have been so crucial for her to have that because she knew she would have been able to be provided for even in her husband's death. Says, don't say that. Do not lie to your servant. And in verse 17 says, the woman conceived and gave birth to a son at that same time. The following year, Elijah had promised her. All right. So without knowing what he could have done for her or what could have happened, the return on her investment by building this room, immediately she gets the provisions for future. Now, if we actually keep reading the story, which we're going to jump. We're not going to keep going through the whole story here because, again, we did that a couple years ago. Her son, she has a son. He's in the field with her husband. One day, he's feeling sick and he dies. And she ends up going back to the prophet because what you promised me, what you gave to me, is not. Why'd you do this? Why did you give something to me that I was not going to have? But that ain't the point of this story. But I do want to say she had the baby. She goes from here. He's in the sun. He's working. He ends up dying. Elijah comes back, helps bring the baby back to life, and then goes on. Okay. Now, in chapter 8, we go, well, between 4 and 8, there's a famine that is pronounced. And I also want to actually call out things about the famine because we right now in the United States have been throwing around words that are like our prices of gas are going up. We talk about inflation, talk about recessions. We haven't heard the word famine in the United States. And I pray that we never get to that point. But I want to draw your attention to things in the scriptures that talks about the time period because of what we are currently in right now. So if I go to chapter 6, um talks about the well, at the end of chapter 4, right after that story, it talks about the famine coming. And in chapter 6, um it talks about this woman coming to the king, and he's like, what do you want? Like, I can't do anything for you. I'm still as desolate as you are too. Like, what do you want? And she tells him this story. And I wonder if you guys remember this from previous texts. So I'm gonna read it aloud. It's Second Kings chapter 6, starts at verse 26. Says, as the king of Israel was passing by on the wall, a woman cried out to him, my lord, the king, help. He answered, if the Lord doesn't help you, where can I get help for you? From the threshing floor of the winepress? Then the king asked her, what's the matter? And she says, this woman said to me, give up your son, and we will eat him today. And then we will eat my son tomorrow. So we boiled my son and ate him. And I said to her the next day, give up your son and we will eat him. But she had hidden her son. And when the king had heard the woman's words, he tore his clothes. Then, and as he was passing by on the wall, the people saw that there was sackcloth under his clothes next to his skin. Y'all, it had gotten so bad in this famine that they are eating their own children. Now, I just mentioned that the price of gas is high, the price of chicken is high, the price of eggs is not as crazy as it was, but the price of groceries is high. I want to remind us that no matter what we go through today, there's always an example or a sample of something in the Bible that we can actually look to. There is nothing new under the sun, and we do not have to try to figure out things or try to come up with more things. We can always go to the word for the comfort that we need and for the guidance that we need. Okay, one other thing or two other things that was happening during this famine was the prices. So, like for us, the inflation, it was saying that the cost of a donkey's head was going to be so much. Now, who's walking around wanting to eat donkey's head? Right? It would be like the equivalency of us saying, um, let's say pig feet, even though some people eat it. But if chicken normally costs $2.75 a pound, it would be like saying the pig feet was like $10 a pound. Like something that you don't want to eat. And something that should be cheap is so expensive. And they were kind of pressed for what it would take to actually afford the things just to be able to eat. And eat even in the same context, they even talked about dove's dung was being sold for food. So it'd be like the equivalency of bird droppings that we have out on the floor, on the ground, or whatever. They had nothing, and it wasn't enough for anybody that they were actually selling at a commodity price. Dove poop is what they were buying and trying to get their hands on because there was nothing. Right? We are not that bad. Even though we don't want to pay the crazy prices of gas, we certainly are not in a famine. So we can actually praise God and thank God that things are not as bad as they could be. And when, or as we continue, I should say it this way, as we continue to go through what we have to go through, is all the more reason why we got to have our finances tight, because there could be a day that the prices get so out of control that I don't want y'all to be talking about killing and eating your kids. All right. So there had to be a strategy for this. And in this case, when we go to chapter 8, we're going to see what that was. So remember, she had her own house. Then, according to the verses in chapter 4, because her child and her husband was in their fields, she owned things. Now, we're going to jump over to chapter 8 in Second Kings. The beginning of chapter 8 assumes the end of her story that's coming from chapter 4 now to 8. In between there is this famine. Chapter 8 starts by saying that she clearly was obedient. It says Elijah said to this woman whose son he had restored to life. That's how we're going to tie the two, that is the same person, that he said to her, "Get ready, you and your household, and go live as a resident alien wherever you can. For the Lord has announced a 7-year famine, and it has already come to the land." Now, the Bible doesn't say how many other people that the prophet warned about this famine. Doesn't say how many other people he told to go. But I'm going to say that because of her initial connections in chapter 4 and the provisions that she made for him, that he is now turning around doing something more for her. He already made sure that she had the son. He is continuing to give to her. So her actual initial investment is continuing to yield dividends, not just a one-time shot and she's out of there. Okay, so it says, "Get ready, you and your household, go live as a resident alien wherever you can, for the Lord has announced a 7-year famine." Verse 2 says, "So the woman got ready and did what the man of God said. She and her household lived as resident aliens in the land of the Philistines for 7 years." Now, we've heard about the Philistines multiple times in other stories, most notably, um, we talk about David, you can talk about Samson. Like, there's many places that we hear about them. She's going into this, I'm gonna say, a far country, going to go live with them, and she's having to adjust, to whatever is happening there, because she's finna be amongst them. Okay, says in verse 3, "When the woman returned from the land of the Philistines at the end of the 7 years, she went to appeal to the king for her house and her field." So I'm gonna pause right here and say, nowhere in this text does it say that she was told to take you and your household and go, and she's all in disarray. It says she did what he told her to do. She goes and lives amongst the Philistines. Now, I would be willing to bet you that if we really start digging, that we could actually go into other books. Remember, our Bible, canonized, is showing things, but if we go and read other places, we could actually probably deduce things that happened in the land of the Philistines. But in this case, it says that we basically gonna say she survived the 7 years, and nothing about that really makes sense sometimes when somebody tell us to do something. And sometimes with our finances, things just do not make any sense at all. Why am I saving this when I gotta pay this? Why am I not paying this when it's this interest rate? So sometimes the instructions that we get are gonna get when it comes time doing from finances on the surface of things, it does not make any sense. We should definitely do our due diligence. And in her case, she believes that this man is a man of God. He did not steer her wrong in the first case. And so in this instance, she is just going to be obedient and follow what he told her. We can take a lesson from her that sometimes when we are obedient, it could include some loss, and we should not be so stuck to what we know because we're trying to preserve what we have. Sometimes the loss isn't a loss on some things it may be. And I'll just drop a pin right here, which we'll talk more in one of our later classes, especially when it comes to investments. If you have, say, let's say you have invested in something, and you're looking at the stock market and you got, $20,000 in this thing, and something happened today, and the stock market goes down, and now it says you got 16,000. You think you've taken a loss, or it looks like a loss, and now you're scrambling. You're trying to figure out what you're going to do. Pause. It ain't time to scramble yet. Just pause, especially in the land of investments, which we are going to cover more in our investment, class day. But that loss that it appeared to be was not even a loss. And even for us in our investment world, looking at it in that exact moment, it's not a loss. On paper, it may be, but because you haven't sold it yet, it still can fluctuate. It can go back up. It can even go beyond the 20,000. So not all losses are losses, and it may even make you gain even more if you just be patient. All right. Now, in the pivot, because she did go to the far land when the famine was over, says she returns. And this is where her actual real blessing comes in. Um, if I go to verse, I'm gonna go back to 3 to keep reading. 3 says, when the woman returned from the land of the Philistines at the end of the 7 years, she went to appeal to the king for her house and her field. The king, well, I'm gonna pause right there too. Because her husband isn't doing this, we will have to assume that her husband is now dead. Because otherwise, this would be something for her husband to do. But she got her son that's going to be able to help her to do these things. So that initial investment is still paying off for her. Okay, so he says she went to appeal to the king for her house and her field. The king had been speaking to Gehazi, the attendant of the man of God, saying, tell me all the great things Elijah has done. So it was like the king himself is getting stories of the things that Elijah did, like his anointing and the blessings that he was able to do was amusing to the king, that this man is sitting here telling him the various things. And as he was telling things, he actually tells the story of the Shunammite woman and the son, and she was walking in when it was happening. So it says, verse 5, while he was telling the king how Elijah restored the dead son to life, the woman whose son he had restored to life came to appeal to the king for her house and field. So Gehazi said, my lord, the king, this is the woman, and this is the son that Elijah restored to life. Can you imagine somebody, you walking in and somebody's talking about something that happened to you, and like it was such a blessing for your life that somebody else is hearing about this, and you get to bear testimony to it in its actual state right then? Y'all, I want to say that there's things that God has done for us that other people are talking about. I can't say that you're gonna ever walk in on them when they're talking about it, but when we tell our stories and we give God the credit for the things that He has done, other people are hearing those things. And when they do hear them, I don't know if they're just being amused. I don't know if they're gaining more faith, but I know what should be happening is that the credit should be going to God. So if and when God makes the opportunity for us to say what God has done, not us, not the things that we have said we put our hands to, and that's how it came about. But the things that God has truly done and He gets all the credit for, we should be telling those things. Those stories should be repeating throughout all of eternity. And I always say that we don't necessarily have to always go back to the Bible to hear something because God is still doing stuff for us. It will be up to us to actually tell those things that He is doing so that people can know that He is still doing them. All right, so it says, this is the woman, this is the son. And then verse 6 says, when the king asked the woman, she told him the story. So the king appointed a court official for her, saying, restore all that was hers. Okay. Give her back her land, give her back her house, give her back her field. Okay. But her investment is still paying off. Because here's another blessing that she's going to get at the end of verse 6. He says, restore all that was hers, along with all the income from the field from the day that she left the country until now. Y'all, she been gone for 7 years. Imagine what can be produced, what the benefit would have been if she worked for 7 years. She gets everything back and the profit from whatever happened in that time. We can't even begin to write the story of the blessings that could come about us by our obedience and actually following, doing what God says. Here, a very tragic, simple, nasty sounding story that we get and shows that not only did she get back what she had, but she got all of the income, which is the definition of a return on your investment. Every time that we do something, we don't know what the return is going to be. We don't even know if there is going to be a return, especially when you really start investing. You could take the losses. You could never gain anything. You may wait it out for a long time, which is oddly enough that in this story that it talks about the 7 year famine, because in our financial world, seven comes up so much. Think about when people have to file for bankruptcy. The number seven comes up in that case. When you are investing monies, people will say that you should be willing to leave your investments anywhere from 3 to 5 to 7 to 10 years. Seven always comes up, and I just think it's just so ironic that we can see here, even though the scriptures themselves don't say the word she made an investment, but literally that's what she did. We can see and translate things over to our current day finances from what happened. Now, in our true finance stories, that there has to be some adaptability. We cannot make a plan, stay on that plan, see that things are being derailed, and keep going on the same plan. That's foolish. And in the finance world, you're going to have to know when to adapt. You're going to have to know when to pivot, whether that's in your basic budgeting, in your billing, but certainly in investments. That there's a time to be able to make the adaptations, but in the adapting of it, that there should be some basic principles that we're not willing to bend on. Okay. All right. Let's see. Now, when she went to the king, she was finna go and advocate for herself. There's nothing that would have suggested to her that she was gonna get there and it was gonna be easy peasy. she was going to make the avocation. When she went when she got there and they were doing the talking, it was like Gehazi, he was preparing the king to be able to have a soft heart. Because what is there to say that he would have having to give this back to her? Plus the fact that she didn't have a husband. And so many instances you would have seen that a woman would have been taken advantage of, just like with us today. There are times that we go to do things and there is no man involved, especially like when you go to do something with a car. They think they're going to get over on you because you're a woman. That kind of stuff was happening back then too. But even in this instance, God made the provision that the king's heart was being softened by somebody already telling her testimony. And again, she didn't just get just the land back, she got the income. She got the increase from what she missed. Doesn't say what her lifestyle was like while she was living amongst the Philistines, but whatever it was, she is going to be able to reap all of that back because God is a restorer. Like we can give God many names and many attributes. And I pray that whatever situation that you be in, that you actually do find the word to describe him. Like there is a book that talks about all of the names of God. Like we can just call him God, the provider, God, the restorer, God, the healer, whatever. But there's actually an actual name for them. And I know I've seen Carla and Kari go through a devotional book that has that. If you want to learn and pray and say the names or call him by those different names, there is a name for it. I know there's plenty of books for that. But there's nothing wrong with you just saying God, the fill in the blank. He can restore to us any losses, but he certainly calculates the increases. He's the creator of increases. And if we actually learn to put things in God's hands, I am certain that He will be the best financial planner, the best accountant, the best stockbroker, or any other thing that you think that you need. There is no one better than God. He will be able to guide us. He'll be able to keep us in perfect peace because sometimes when we deal with finances, it's such a stressful thing. I was talking to a lady today, and we were talking about um, she's writing a book, and she was telling me that the book is about being the best mom that you can be. And it's odd for her to be the one that is writing this. I would never think that that was what her book would be about. And she's a good mom. And in us talking about it, I said that sometimes we get ready to study or want to study on whatever our problem is. And we gave the example about a mom. And I said sometimes moms may think that they're not a good mom because they can't always get their kids, whatever their kid wants or whatever. And I said that in that instance, I would still say before you try to be a better mom, you got to be a better you. You got to be a better woman because it is the attributes of you as the woman that makes the mom. And if your problem is that you think you're not a good mom because you're not giving your child all the things that you could give your child, that's not a mom problem. That's a finance problem. When the finances are right, you, the woman, having the right finances, you could be in the position to give your child more things. It's not a mom problem. It's a finance problem. So we need to actually call the things and deal with the real things, the root basics of the things, and know that we need to be able to invoke God into all things. What is God saying about my finances? And what have I said back in return to what God has said about my finances? All right. But He can be anything for you. All right. So I want to kind of close this with saying that there's this full circle thing. She made a room for Elisha, and God made room for her in the systems. Like, no way should a woman go and a king restores all things to her when she has no husband. The system was set up against her. 7 years she was gone. You abandoned your land. There was no reason that she should have gotten this back. But because of her initial investment, because of her recognition of the faith and what this prophet was supposed to do, her hospitality just as a woman, and her convincing her husband of being able to be hospitable to this prophet, you get a son, you get the protection from the famine, and you get to return back from the famine and get everything that you had. God is the ultimate supplier, and He can make room for us when we make room for Him. And a lot of times when I am talking to people about finances, I always start with, where is God in your life? I don't want to talk about your money yet, because most cases the money is not the problem. And when people think that you can have a finance class and you're going to get a get rich quick class, that's never going to happen when you're really trying to align your will and your life up to God. We got to make the alignment right. So before we really start digging in to money, let's make sure that the investment that we are putting out is in our own life with Christ. The return that we can get from that is unspeakable. But there clearly are things that we can learn in the world of investments when it comes from the Bible, which we will do in one of our classes. But there's full circle moments that we will have here. You will never know what your, I'm going to just give a basic example, what your $5 that you put out returns to you. The Bible talks about us receiving in abundance the things that we put out. He says he wants us to live abundantly, and this doesn't always talk about money when it is. We just happen to be talking about finances in this series. So you make room for things, and see that the things that you make room for turn around and make room for you. All right, which that's the part I just said. Be intentional about the things that you are making room for as well. While you're on this journey of you trying to be a better and a real woman, what are you intentionally making room for? What things like kind of cloud us and crowd us? We have to take responsibility for what we're going to put out front. And what we put out front normally is what our interest is and where our heart lies. So I would say be intentional about what you're making room for, because it certainly can have those full circle moments. And when they do, I pray to Jesus that you will be like, God did it, and it wasn't you. All right. So the one thing that I want to, one question or two questions I want to read to you, and then I'm gonna see what kind of comments or questions you guys may have. Say that what are we holding on to that God may be telling us to release, whether it's permanently or temporarily. Like I have multiple examples of things that I was like, I am really struggling with this because I don't understand it. And we're not going to always understand it. But if we stay in the word, clearly there will be things that God will be pointing out to us that He's not telling you to stay tied to it, or He didn't say that this is where you're supposed to be, or you may just be temporarily turning from something for Him to be able to move. And are we being flexible enough to survive? Right? We have our plans, we have our goals, we have our, outlooks of whatever the things are that we're doing. Are we being flexible enough that we'll be able to survive whatever season that God puts before us? Okay. Now, of course, I'm always going to ask you, where do you see yourself, and um, let's see, how do I do this? Where do you see yourself, and what kind of questions do we have? Let's see, are you guys still looking at my screen? I don't know what I did here. Okay, yeah. Okay, I want to stop this. Okay. So what where do you see yourself here, and or what kind of questions do you have from this full circle moment of this lady and her investments? Okay, no comments. I see
I like
no.
I see
Okay.
the fact that she was a blessing, but she didn't really expect anything earthly in return. Like in
Mm-hmm.
a way, it's one of them like I know where I'm getting mine from, and I'm not concerned about what I can get here on earth.
Mm-hmm. And all of our returns on investment not coming here. Like clearly in the New Testament, especially like when Jesus is talking or teaching disciples and telling them about how we should not be like other people, is when he calls out like we shouldn't be um giving our alms in public, like we shouldn't, like our charitable things we should not be doing for other people to see, because when we make such a spectacle out of us doing this thing, that's your reward. But I promise I would rather have a reward in heaven than for somebody to give me the pat on the back and say, oh, she did this or she did that. Yeah, our all of our returns are not gonna be on this earth. And I promise you the ones that are not on this earth are worth more, way more valuable than what is on this earth. Right. That's a great observation. Okay. Anyone else? Okay. So that was our last real woman that we're going to talk about before we actually go into our actual finance classes. We will still be in scriptures, but we will bring in more practical and life applications and actually going through examples and making sure that we can say that as a real woman, we are getting our finances in order, or we are re-looking at our finances to try to make sure that we align up to what the potential is from what we have. And I'll tell you like a opening statement that I normally have when I'm teaching a finance class is that the question is never how much you have, because there's never going to be enough. It's not about the dollar amount. And once we get past that principle that I don't have enough to do A, B, or C, then we'll be able to actually do or see how God can take what we have to actually do what we need to do. So we'll start on next week, going into some very practical lessons about finances. And hopefully at the end of our time together that you could say that your finances, that your bag is more secure than what it is today. All right. Any questions or comments before we end tonight? Okay, real women. Then we will see you next Monday, same time, 7 o'clock, for our first practical lesson on our finances. Bye.